Hello everyone, and welcome to Tutorial 5. I've switched up the cameras based on some feedback from an individual who thought it would be good if in my videos, at least some of them, that you could see the keyboard and see my hand positions as we talk about the chord progressions. And I thought that was a great idea. The cameras I had set up before were kind of more pan shots of the whole studio. So I've put camera number 2 to look at these two keyboards, the Roland Phantom and the Jupiter X. And you can see my fingers a little bit better and what notes they're playing on the keyboard. So in this particular tutorial, I'm going to get back into more the creation of the progressions themselves, the chords within a progression, and then how to vary the playing of those chords to vary the musical composition. So the first 3 tutorials that I built were focused on an A minor being the tonic, an A minor scale, and then progressions around the A minor chord. And so we'll work on that today, and then maybe in future videos we'll take another scale like a C minor scale or something and work on the relative chords and intervals on that at a later time. So I described several different chord progressions in tutorials 1 through 3, but I'm going to talk about some chord progressions today. This is really a tutorial for folks that want to really start practicing and getting into really building an improvisation as quickly as they can. And then my suggestion to folks that have never done it before is, like everything, start with a platform. Start to learn that platform and the basic tools that you're going to use, and then grow that complement of tools incrementally. So you help build that memory within your mind about the chords you want to play, the sounds within your keyboards that you want to use, and so forth. And then how you play those chords, whether you arpeggiate them or play them together or invert the chords and so forth. We'll get into that discussion today. But the key is, when you're doing improv, that you want to make it interesting for the user by changing up what you play. The variety is what makes music interesting. So if we start out with a basic A minor chord, which is an A, a C, and an E. A, C, and E. And I'm going to switch this to piano. So I can play that chord as a fundamental here, or I can play in version 1 or in version 2. They all sound a little different because the top note is different and the bottom note is different. Now, that is an A minor chord. I can play it with both hands and add additional notes, but they're all related to the A minor chord, A, C, and E. So I would suggest, as you start doing that, if you're going to use this technique I'm sharing, that you start with one chord like A minor, and you just start kind of playing around. How does that sound? Okay. So again, I'm just playing 3 notes all over the keyboard. Now, that is the first chord. Now, I want to take a second chord and add it to my complement of chords for the A minor scale. So here's the A minor, and I'm going to play an F major key. F major is F, A, C. So that's an F major chord. And again, with 2 hands, and if you get your fingers to the point where they're flexible enough to be able to play arpeggiation like that and moving notes, you can now create kind of an interesting pattern with just 2 chords. Here's A minor, F major, Okay, so that's chord number 2 is the F majors. Now, take a third chord that you include in your complement, your toolkit now for the A minor scale. And, you might want to write these down if you want, but now the next chord will be a D minor chord. A D minor chord. That includes D, F, and A. Okay? Number 3 chord. So, first chord, if you're playing along with me, do an A minor chord. Now do an F major, which is F, A, and C. And now do a D minor chord. And then back to an A minor. Okay. Now, you can also play a G major chord in this collection of chords. So here's an A minor. And now, instead of going to an F major, go to a G major chord first and then to an F major chord. So if you're doing... There's an A minor. Now, G major chord, and I know there's a lot of chords here. That's why you want to write them down if you're not aware of what they are. A G major is G, B, and D. So there's A minor, G major, which is G, B, D, G, B, D. F major is F, A, C. And you just keep on those 3 notes. And then you can play a D minor, D, F, A, and then an A minor again. Now to a G. Now you can play around. You can go down to an F again, or you can go to a D minor. To an F major. To G major. To A minor. Okay, so now we have 4 chords. We got this A minor, a G major, an F major, a D minor, and then A minor. Now I'm going to add one more chord, which is an E major. Another chord, E, G sharp, and B. E, B sharp, G sharp, and B. And it can be any variation of those 3 notes. I don't really care how you do it. Just remember that those 3 notes are part of an E major scale. E major chord. Okay, so now we've got 5 chords. Now how I use those chords in a progression is really what sequence of chords I play. And so many times a song or an improv will have a pattern that you repeat over time of a sequence of chords. But if you invert that pattern or you change it up a little bit, you can make some very interesting variations on a theme. So I'm going to just go in and play some variations on those 5 notes, 5 chords. Again, there's an A minor, there's a G major, there's an F major, there's a D minor, and there's an E major. So what I just did there is I changed up a progression. I went from to A minor to G major to F major to E major. And then here's a D minor. Watch what I'm going to do next. There's a D minor. But instead of going to a tonic note, in other words, I'm going to play an A minor chord, but I'm going to use a C in the bass. It'll be a different sound. See that? So now I'm playing an A minor chord, but my bass, the lowest note I play, is a C. And now I can go from an A minor to an E major again, but instead of hitting E down in the bass, I'm going to go to using a B as the bass. And again, the B here is part of the E major chord. It's the 3rd note of that chord, but I'm going to play that as the bass note. And then back to an A minor. So, right there, now I've got enough of a toolkit. I keep talking about toolkits. My toolkit includes the chords I play, how I play those chords based on the tones I use, whether it might be a piano or strings or choir or a flute. And so that toolkit includes the sounds I have access to, my keys and how I play them, and then the grace notes or transitional notes that I also play when I'm doing a chord progression. So a transition note or a grace note might be I'm going to go from an A minor, and instead of just going to a G chord from an A minor chord, I'm going to use my upper, almost like a melody, and use a grace note. Go to a D. Okay, so the only thing I did there was I added like a transition note between the different chords, kind of giving it a gracious transitional feel from one chord to the next. All right. So, for those of you who are interested in learning how to do this, my suggestion is that every day you kind of build your toolkit. You sit down at your keyboard and you work on a chord progression, a set of chords that you're going to plug together in a chord progression and variations on that progression, and you just try it out. Maybe just with playing the chords first. So A minor to G major to D minor to E major, A minor to G major to F major to E major, and then to D minor, and now to A minor, but with a C for the bass, which is not the tonic. And then from there, I can take an E major chord with a B on the bass. And I can even do a grace note like this. Back to an A, then an F major. Okay? So practice that if you can. Go through it, get comfortable with it, internalize it. It'll take a couple of days, maybe a week or two, to really feel comfortable about those scales. And specifically, as you're doing that, in the A minor scale, I want you to be able to not only just play the chords, but to move around those chords. Within the confines of those keys themselves, of the chords, you can create a lot of variety. There's a lot more you're going to be able to do as you get more comfortable with the basic chords. But right now, get comfortable with the chords so you can just kind of feel, well, where should I go next? That's going to take some listening and playing to to basically have your ears and your hands work together, okay? Okay. Now, the other thing I would mention is that I've been using a piano here, but let's see what it sounds like if I change this to a nice pad. I'm not going to want to play like a piano where I'm striking the keys at different times. I might want to create a very luxurious sound. It's a G major, D minor, E major, A minor, G major, D minor, E major, and then go to an F, to a D minor, to a E major, to an A minor with a C on the bass, and then a D minor chord. So right there, that's a pretty, very nice ambiance. You can do so much with such a small complement of tools. It's quite amazing, especially with these keyboards, because with the amount of sound files they have in here, the different tones you can get, it's staggering to me. So here's another one. I'm going to do a cello and a violin. I'm going to use the same chord structures, but with the violin, it's a single voice instrument. So as a cello, unless you're playing two strings at a time, so the most you can is two notes from one of those instruments. But just watch what I'm going to do. I'm going to play with the same chords, but I'm going to just use the type of sound you would normally get from a cello or a violin. Now you'll notice I was taking some liberty with my right hand, and I wasn't necessarily staying within those keys of each of the chords. But as you play, you're going to start to realize where certain notes will just fit within the chord structure you're playing in. We'll learn a little bit more about that later, but in many cases, it's like it's pretty straightforward as you start to get comfortable, especially with the key of A minor. Most of the keys are going to be, you're not going to be playing many black notes here because A minor, depending on the A minor scale, there's not a lot of sharps or flats that are in black notes. So you're going to stay mainly on the main keyboard here, but on E major you do have a G sharp. But that one is part of the key signature of the E chord, E major chord. So you'll notice there was 3 different styles: a cello and violin with a single voice or on both, a nice deep beautiful pad, and a piano. So now, again, to go back and refresh your memory, I got an A minor, I've got a G major scale is in my toolkit, I've got an F major scale, and again, you might want to write down the 3 notes for each of these that make up that chord, and then D minor, and then E major, and A minor. Now I'm going to do 2 more variations for you because it'll even add more richness to the palette of chords, colors that you can use to make an improvisation in E minor. One of those, instead of E major, which is E, G sharp, and B, E minor is a variation. That's E, G, and B. That's E major, here's E minor. Okay? So now, as you put down your chord progressions, I got A minor, I got G major, I got F major, E major, E minor. Now, I also have D minor, and then I want you to add 1 more, and that's all I'm going to talk about today. It's D major. So D major chord is D, F sharp, and A. Okay, so D major, D minor, E major, E minor, F major, G major, A minor. Okay? Those are all the chords we're going to talk about for a couple sessions. And with those chords and with arpeggiating those chords and inversions and grace or transition notes, you can build a really interesting improvisation. And my suggestion is you get really comfortable with those chords. Try different variations. Once you've got them set down with the different chords on a piece of paper, just kind of put it in front of you and then say, okay, what does this sound like? I've got an A minor to start with. Let me try going to an E major chord. That would work. What if I went from E major to F major? That works too. To D minor, to E major, to A minor. So there's just many ways to play around with this thing. The other thing you okay. So the other thing I would recommend, in addition to doing those chords and just playing around and using different inversions, which means inversion again. If I'm playing an A minor key this way, this is this is the main position of an A minor scale, with the A being the lowest, C and E. But you can play an inversion of those chords by just moving the A to the top and then C to the top. Okay? The other thing you can do, like I said again, is you can change the bottom bass note from an A. That sounds very different than this. Okay? This is almost like you're waiting for the next chord. And the next chord could be a D major chord. So, you'll notice that I can create some very deep textures and powerful sounds with just those keys. So let me play something really quick. This is going to be a pipe organ, full sounding like. A minor, E minor, to D minor. Now see, with the D minor chord, I'm playing an F, so it doesn't sound like a finished. Hear that? And now there's an E major chord. And then finally, I'll do some flutes. Okay, the more you get comfortable with those chords, then you can start playing some really fascinating sounds, especially if you have keyboards like this that have moving textures and so forth. But so. Okay. So, one more thing I would recommend, I suggested this in the earlier tutorials. If you have a keyboard at home and you want to practice to get the independence between your fingers, there's a really good tool besides doing scales. Scales are very good because they help give you flexibility in your fingers, and it teaches you the different keys within a scale. But to strengthen your fingers, so the scale, there are scale books out there that you can purchase or online, and you'll see the different scales. If you just work on one scale, a C major scale, that's all the stuff. There's no accidentals in the C major scale. It's the easiest scale to play. And what I used to do when I was younger, I had a book of scales, and every week I was assigned a scale every week or two, and I would practice that going up and down 2 octaves with each hand, working on the right fingering for the scale. So for the C scale, for example, if you're practicing that to get your fingers limbered, you go from C, D, E, F, G, A, you cross over with your 3rd finger, and then your 4th finger on the next octave. And you'll see that in the scale book. But if you do get a scale book or you see it online, okay, so you first start working with each hand separately, and then over time play them together. But each hand separately will give you, if you're new to this, will give you a little challenge, to... I just do this for, gosh, many minutes until my fingers were tired. Now the other exercise, the same way with the left hand. And then the only other exercise I would recommend is to sit down with first, third, and fifth finger first on both fingers or both hands, and take the other two fingers and very slowly hit the keys between those fingers. And just keep working. Make sure you hold the other three keys down. Don't let them lift, don't let the fingers lift off the keys. And just keep doing that for a couple minutes a day. On the second and fourth fingers, then take these and take the first and third on the first, and the pinky and the middle finger on the left hand. And now you're working independence of these two relative to the fourth finger and these two relative to the second finger. And then finally, the third variation is the opposite, taking the pinky fourth and second on the left. So you're going to be playing the third and first finger, and then on the other, it's the thumb, second and fourth finger, and you're going to doing the pinky and the third finger there, so middle finger. Okay. Just keep doing that. You're going to have a hard time keeping that in sync at first, so go real slow. First day, it might be hard just to keep your other fingers on the key, the keys. You're training your brain to know the different fingers are separate from each other, which is very, very good when you're creating moving dynamic parts within a piece of music, because all your fingers start to operate more independently. So that's the exercises I would recommend. Just spend some time. Just take about 5-10 minutes a day and strengthen your fingers. And then take 15, 20, 30 minutes a day and play A minor chord, G major chord, F major chord, E major chord, D minor chord, and A minor chord. And then you could do E major chord. The other thing is you have two variations that I'm suggesting. Besides your D minor chord, you can play a D major chord. Sometimes that works. And then instead of an E major chord, you can play an E minor chord. Okay? So practice those and get comfortable, and then sit down and just try out something. Create something using those different keys. So that one was, I did A minor, F major, D minor, and A minor. So again, in many cases, once you start to get comfortable with those different chords, just try them in different variations and see which ones you like. Over time, you're going to build that memory of what you appreciate, and you're going to be able to just transition from one chord to the next. Okay? So that's it for tutorial 5, a much more simple and focused on individual chord progression, chords, and then potentials to make up progressions from those chords. Progression is just a sequence of chords. And then how in the world you play those chords or keys within those chords based on the different tones you select, whether it be a piano, a pad or a choir sound, or organ, or cello and violin. All right? Well, thank you so much. If you have any suggestions or requests on other things you'd like me to cover, feel free to put them in the comments on the tutorials. I read them religiously, but sometimes I don't reply right away. But I'm always very curious about the feedback you have for me. Thank you all so much. I hope you have a wonderful evening and God bless.